Hello and welcome to the premiere, the very first episode of the David Gregor's Show. By listening to this, you are on the cutting edge, jumping on board something before it becomes a worldwide sensation. Or perhaps you're a hipster just checking out the underground political podcast scene before I sell out. Whatever brings you here, I welcome you and I appreciate you checking out the show. If you like what you hear, just let me know. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow me on Twitter at David Gregors. You can look me up on Parler. I think it's at David J. Gregors over there. I don't use it very much. Whatever you do, just let us know what you think. So, even though this is my first podcast, I'm not going to bore you with a long-winded introduction. I am your host, David Gregors. I am currently an attorney. I spent 12 years as a paramedic. I consider myself to be somewhere between a small L libertarian and a conservative. I used to consider myself a progressive or a liberal, but I have since seen the light, and as I'm sure will be made clear as the podcast continues on through the episodes, I have written a few articles for WorldNet Daily, but I am otherwise just getting started in the world of political commentary, though admittedly I have been annoying my friends and family with my political commentary for decades now. The format for this show will be simple, in that I will simply make it up as I go along, and I will change those things as I decide what works and what doesn't. This is my first attempt at such a venture, so I have a lot of things to learn. For today, I'm going to keep it fairly short. I will only talk about one item of interest, and I will turn it over to you, my intrepid listeners, to leave me comments about what I have to say. So with that, let's get started. I would like to talk a little bit about the Tucker Carlson, Sidney Powell kerfuffle that happened this week. I know I'm actually a couple of days behind on this, but I keep seeing it on my Twitter feed, so I figured, okay, today is the day that I start my podcast. There's really way too much going on with this thing to try to fit into the Twitter verse or to try to do a Twitter thread, and I don't really have very many followers on Twitter yet anyway, so I'm not really sure that's the best use of my time. But the reason that this is a problem is because there really is so much bad information out there about what is going on, and I think Tucker is actually to blame a little bit here for giving aid and comfort to those who want to see this election result stand as is, without any investigation of the claims of fraud, any investigation of the software glitches that have been proven to happen, and by his own admission, any investigation of the dead people that he introduced on his show, that he showed that dead people actually voted in this election. So, on Thursday night, Tucker went on his Fox News show and told the world that he and his team had reached out to the apparent head of Trump's legal team, Sidney Powell, and invited her to come on the show to present her evidence of widespread issues with voting across the country, specifically in regard to the 2020 election. He offered her the entire show, or the entire week as he said it, to present her evidence. He said she refused to provide her evidence on his show and told him not to call her again. Doesn't sound good. Tucker then said he called other people involved in the Trump campaign, and these people, whoever they may be, also said they had not seen the evidence. At this point, Tucker, perhaps unintentionally, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but Tucker gave the leftists license to go out into the world and said, "See, there is no evidence. Suck it, Cult 45. Even Tucker Carlson says you have nothing." Tucker also managed to thoroughly piss off his own viewers, the majority of which had largely turned off Fox News except for his show, due to the perceived bias towards Joe Biden that had been emerging over the past few months. These people saw Tucker as an ally, and they felt that he had betrayed them essentially by throwing up his hands and saying, "Let's call the election. There's no evidence to be seen." Now, I'm actually somewhat sympathetic to Tucker's position. He's a journalist. He has a primetime spot, 8 o'clock on Fox News. He wants to make the big splash and get the evidence of the biggest crime in Democratic history. And maybe, just maybe, he thought she would comply and go on his show since it's him and he's seen to be a friendly figure. Furthermore, I totally understand his frustration. I have seen Sidney Powell Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis go on multiple forums like Newsmax and present the basis of the cases they're making. They've had a number of news conferences where they've discussed a little bit about what they're trying to do. I, too, have noticed that there seems to be a lot of puffing and not so many specifics in these news conferences. And I, like many of you probably, kind of rolled my eyes when Sidney Powell said she was going to, quote unquote, release the Kraken in terms of the evidence she has. So I can see why Tucker felt as though she would happily come on his show as a friendly entity and make her case. And I can see why he thinks it's important to cut through all of this Kraken stuff to get to the heart of the matter. But I do blame Tucker for bad form. The thing about any court case is that there is a very specific process to be followed. I don't care if you are doing some small claims action about a damaged fence or a major constitutional case about election fraud. It is entirely bad form to litigate your case on television. First of all, if your opponents can simply turn on the television and see all the evidence you are going to try to use, all of the strategies you plan to use, and all of the arguments you plan to make, then you deserve to lose your case. Part of the skill of winning in court involves forcing your opponent to anticipate your moves. The better you are at anticipating, the better you are in court. It is plainly obvious, and it transposes to many different fields. Imagine a football team handing over its playbooks to an opponent. Imagine General Eisenhower dialing up Adolf Hitler and telling him about the plan to storm the beaches of Normandy. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. Another reason is public opinion. As it turns out, judges are regular human beings with very difficult jobs. If you ask a judge to decide and rule on any sort of matter, it is his or her job to weigh the evidence and make a decision based on the law. The more noise that is introduced to that process, the harder it becomes for the judge to make a good decision. In the cases that are going on in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, soon to be Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, all those places, there is already a lot of noise. The judges know that no matter what they decide, the cases will likely end up in the United States Supreme Court. So for that reason, they want to make sure the record is complete and clean with the best legal decision they could possibly make. That is to say, the best decision based on the law and the evidence presented. The pressure is already high, and add to that the potential of violent protests at the courthouses or at the homes of the judges, and it's just a big, big mess. But I have worked with judges in the past, and I can tell you that inviting media attention and attempting to levy public outcry and public opinion against the judge in a particular case will certainly not play in your favor. Even more than that, evidence isn't merely presented to the court. It actually has to be admitted. It has to have probative value. It has to be scrutinized by opposing parties. There are entire books of rules of evidentiary procedure. Each state has their different ones. The federal evidentiary procedure is something different than what is of the 50 states for the most part. There are entire classes dedicated to how, first of all, what is evidence, how to get that evidence admitted, and how to prevent that evidence from being admitted. It has to be scrutinized by all parties. It isn't show and tell day in preschool when you can just bring a rock you found in the yard and nobody thinks twice about it. It's a court hearing, and evidence must be admitted into the record by the judge through very specific rules. If you go on Tucker Carlson's show and roll out all of your evidence, and it turns out that 90% of it isn't able to be admitted into the court, what you have managed to do is rile people up even more than they already are and set them up to believe that the process isn't fair. Imagine, for instance, I am prosecuting a murder charge and a police officer comes up to me and says, "Hey, I found a murder weapon in the defendant's luggage." That's great. That's a coup for the prosecution if that happens. So I take that knife or the murder weapon and I go to Nancy Grace or whatever with this weapon and I say, "Look here. Look, we have this knife. Look how scary it is. And he killed her with it. He killed his wife with it and we found it in his luggage." That's all great, and it's going to make great ratings, and it's really going to get people in my community on my side as really trying to get this bad murderer locked up. But fast forward a bit to when the defense counsel actually gets a chance to examine this evidence, to talk to the police officer who found it, and to really put some scrutiny on it. And you find out that the luggage wasn't found in the defendant's home. And as it turns out, the victim was shot and not stabbed. Of course, the court can't allow that evidence in because it wasn't what it purports to be. It was not the murder weapon of this particular crime. Yet and still, I've gone on television and I've portrayed my evidence as being stronger than what it is. I've gone on television and I have essentially poisoned the well against this poor criminal defendant over here. We don't know if he's guilty. We don't know if he's not guilty. But what we do know is that I've used bad evidence to paint him as guilty. So now I've needlessly smeared a man with bad evidence. I've ruined his reputation. Due process would have sorted that out just fine if I, as prosecutor, would have allowed it to happen. But media outrage cannot so easily be sorted out. The same applies here. If Powell had released her evidence on Tucker's show, MAGA country would have seized on every last bit of it. Each bit of it would have been retweeted and tweeted and parlored and Facebooked. There would have been long explainer videos on YouTube, and when the time comes and the court doesn't allow that evidence, all of MAGA country would cry foul. Why? Because they would think that the system was rigged. They would think that because they were allowed to believe that the evidence is stronger than what it is. We don't know what the evidence is now. Sidney Powell is correct to hold it back until she gets in front of the court. It's just good strategy. For what it's worth, and I know a lot of other people have said this, Sidney Powell has a great reputation in the legal community. I've never heard of her being accused in chicanery, of any chicanery, but of course we don't run in the same circles. As most of you probably know, she took on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn's case and got his bogus charges dropped. She's exposed a lot of shenanigans at the DOJ regarding Enron prosecutions and the prosecution of former Alaska Senator Ted Stevens. Giuliani's reputation has taken a bit of a hit over the years, mainly because the leftists and the never-Trumpers of the world hate any Trump ally, but most Americans remember Rudy for cleaning up New York City, defeating the mafia, and his amazing leadership in the aftermath of 9/11. I really don't think these two would really willingly destroy their reputations for nothing. I don't think they would do it just for a sense of pure loyalty to Trump. Besides the fact that if they truly had nothing and they were just trying to overturn an election, that would seem to me to be a pretty clear-cut case of treason. But even without that, I just don't see them throwing it all away on shaky evidence. So let's allow the process to work itself out. Let's allow the Trump team to get before a judge, get the evidence out in a proper way, and let's see what happens. I could do without the puffing and the Kraken talk and all of that, but I would never confuse the unwillingness to show everyone your cards in the middle of the hand of poker with not having any cards at all. If you don't want to show me your cards before I make a bet, I would say you are a minimally competent poker player, because nothing says you have to show your cards prior to betting. And it's the same thing here. There's nothing out there that says that Tucker Carlson is entitled to see any evidence of any case or controversy that is currently pending before the courts. Just as there is nothing saying that the media has any power to declare an election, the media also does not have the power to decide court cases. Let's let it play out, let's trust the process, and we can go from there. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this, the premiere episode of the David Gregers Show. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, tweet, parlor, and whatever else you need to do to get the word out about the show if you liked it. If you didn't like it, you don't have to do any of that, obviously. Also, head on over to WorldNet Daily and check out my latest article, The Devil Went Down to Georgia, in which I discuss how Georgia has sold its soul to Hollywood. No big surprise to see what's happening in Georgia, but sad nonetheless. Thank you for listening, and until next time, be well, be safe, and God bless.